edition of the Silverbird Selection. I've just recently finished my 50th game review, so that means it's time once again for me to head over to my computer and look at the last 10 games I've reviewed, comparing them to the review scores from ZZap magazine back in the 80s and also the Lemon 64 user review scores. So let's head over to my computer right now and get started.
Here we are again then, looking at my Excel spreadsheet that's tracking my collection, and here are the 10 games that we're going to be looking at this time. I've filtered the list down to those, and the ratings of these games range from the lowest I've ever recorded, 3.5, to the highest I've ever recorded, 8.5. So we've got a good range of games, or a range of games, some of which are good and some of which aren't, in this particular comparison video. So as always, we'll go through the list in the order that I played the games, and the first one of those games was Pacman Pat, which I gave a score of 3.5, and to be frank, that was probably overrated. So we go to Lemon as always and search for Pacman Pat, and we get no results. I'll just try a couple of variations. I know what's going to happen. It's not going to find it. So you can see Pacman Pat is not actually held on Lemon. Maybe no one knew it existed when they built the Lemon database, or maybe they just decided not to include it because it's complete rubbish. But luckily, a user on YouTube who watched my Pacman Pat review video, Jeffrey44, pointed out that a ZZap review did exist for it, and it was reviewed in issue 47, March 1989. Here is the review at the top of the page here. Pacman Pat Silverbird 199, as you can see there, and a very washed out screenshot of the game. And you can see that they gave it 19%, which is probably a fairer score than the score I gave it, to be fair. It says the idea of a sliding block puzzle game is hardly original, and Pacman Pat is one of the worst I've ever played. The viewing area is very small, the control poor, the graphics confusing, and the gameplay frustrating. Not much for puzzle fans here, I'm afraid. My advice is to go for Zenji or save your money for Tetris. So there you go. A not very glowing review from ZZap there, just as we expected really. So let's move on to the next game. So here we are back at Lemon, and we'll go for the next game that I reviewed, which was Spikey Harold, which I gave a score of 5.5. As you can see, the Lemon users gave it a score of 4.7 from 22 votes. Very cute in an era when cute didn't sell. Unfortunately, the gameplay is a bit crap, it's slow, the gameplay mechanics are terrible, the music gets annoying fast, it's a poor use of the Commodore 64. This was damn near impossible due to the main character being too bloody big and clumsy. Yep, I would agree with that. And the bottom comment here, the premise was to guide Harold the Hedgehog in preparation for hibernation. Nice little collect 'em up budget game, but reminded me too much of playing the dreaded ZX. Yes, it was very Spectrum-y looking. So let's take a look at the ZZap review from issue 18. Black and white review with a black and white screenshot. And they gave it a very similar score too, 48%. Masochistic platform freaks will love it. There are better platform games available, but very few are as cheap. Highly frustrating to play, but there's quite a bit to see and do if you're willing to persevere. And some of the comments here: I hate this type of platform game, slow and far too demanding. A good platform game shouldn't rely so heavily on pixel perfect jumps. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't like this sort of game either, says Julian Rignall. Sitting there for ages waiting for a nasty to get to the right position so Spikey can jump isn't my idea of fun, and it makes the game so boring to play. And the final reviewer comment there: to be honest, Spikey Harold is quite an attractive game, but it's too frustrating. There's very little skill involved. The best way to complete it is to solve one screen at a time, working out the best possible route to follow. This is a very slow and laborious process. So yeah, I'd agree pretty much with all those comments. I didn't mention the graphics score there, but it's 47%, simple and lacking in colour. Yeah, pretty much agree with everything, both in the Lemon users and the ZZap users, and we all gave it a fairly similar score. Mine was 5.5, Lemon's 4.7, and ZZap is 48%, so very middle of the road scores all round there. Let's move on then to the third game that I reviewed, and that was American Road Race. Now if we search for that on Lemon, we get no results, and that's because of course the original name of it was the Great American Cross Country Road Race, and there we have it. Originally released by Activision in 1985, and I gave this a score of 7.4, and Lemon users have given it a score of 7.9. Lots of comments here. Scroll down, see if we can find a short one, not read all these huge ones out. Loved this game as a kid, could never win it though. which I find a bit surprising because I found it quite easy. Cute little game from 1985. Oh, there's some very long reviews here. Nice little racer, this one. Best racing game for the platform, beats the crap out of Outrun games any day of the week. Give this one a try. Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Atari 2600 Enduro plus a whole lot more for the C64. Used to be one of my favourites, though it's not so fun anymore. I think it's still fun, but I would agree with that. It's very like the earlier Activision game Enduro. So yeah, another comment there saying the same thing actually. Activision ports their 2600 Classic Enduro on the C64. The result is a very good game. Comment there about the gas stations as well, which are very hard to get, but you do get used to that the more you play it. So there you go, plenty of comments there, all pretty positive, and the score is 7.9. And if we move to the ZZap review, you can see another pretty positive score there. This is actually from issue 5, so this is the original $9.99 cassette release version from Activision rather than the budget re-release. So interestingly, the review goes across 2 pages rather than filling up that page there. It's going from left to right. So if we move on to the following page, we'll see that they gave it a score of 77%, so very similar to my score again, which was 7.4, and the Lemon score. A couple of grainy looking screenshots on there, but overall it's a good variation on a popular theme. Good 3D graphics and perspective on both cars and road. Sound is little more than some brums, chugs, pinks and a couple of bits of music. Hookability is addictive as any other of the genre. Lastability, but it has a little bit more than your average race game. It would have been a bit more tempting if it was slightly cheaper. So I imagine if they had reviewed the budget version, then they would have been quite impressed with that and given it a higher score. So just to look quickly at the comments, is my first impression of this game was a rather bad version of Enduro, but playing it further I found it was actually quite a good little road race. Things like gear changing, fuel and radar traps were all part and parcel of the game, and there's plenty of challenge to keep you coming back just for another go. I really liked it, and finishing the race in first place will be a goal anyone would seek for quite a long time. Yes, it was quite a difficult game, not that difficult to finish the race, but difficult to finish in the high places. And that's a very big long review there, which I'm not going to read. So let's move on to the next game. So next up we have Cheapskate, one of the later releases from Silverbird in 1989, and this has got a Lemon user rating of 6.2, which is exactly the same score as I gave it. Not many comments though, just one really, which says nice graphics and the controls are good, but if you're a skateboard fan, download Skate or Die instead. Well, I'm not going to argue with that because Skate or Die is a much better game, but fair enough comments. So let's move to the ZZap review, and again you can see there's pretty much consensus between myself, Lemon and ZZap, because it got 64% in ZZap. A Cheapskate's for all the family and you don't have to be an expert. Graphics, interesting scrolling angle, clear and detailed sprites. A tune to go skateboarding to is the sound. For hookability they said lively enough to grab you straight away, and for lastability they said memorising the levels might get slightly tedious. So moving on to the reviewer comments. I'm not the world's greatest skateboarding fan, and I've never been very good at getting the hang of skateboarding sims, but this one was just about easy enough even for me. And another comment here, right, let's get straight down to the nitty gritty. Do you want a proper skateboard sim with plenty of complicated manoeuvres and incredibly complex jumping opportunities, or not? If you do, then get yourself a copy of Codemasters Pro Skateboard Simulator, because that's a lot more like the real thing. Now coincidentally that's reviewed just below there and got 79%. On the other hand, if you want to just muck about and can't think of a present to give your brother, give this a go. I'm not saying it's as easy as falling off a log, but whoever said that games have to be easy to be fun? It's a bit of a strange thing to say. I'm not really sure what she's getting at there. Anyway, what else are you going to do on those long and boring winter nights? On second thoughts, don't answer that. A bit of a curious reviewer comment. It doesn't really say much about the game itself. So there you go, pretty short review from ZZap, and they gave it 64%, which again, as I said, correlates almost exactly with Lemon users and myself. So moving on to the next game, and it's Video Classics that I reviewed next, which I gave a score of 6.6. Lemon users give it a score of 5.9, so relatively close to my score. Not much in the way of comments here, but it does say maybe the best Pong game on the C64, good music and graphics, and most important, 6 different interesting versions of the classic arcade concept, which I would agree with. ZZap, on the other hand, if we look at their review, were not impressed whatsoever. They've called it Blip Video Classics, which was the full name of it, and they gave it 15%, one of the most pointless budget releases ever. Presentation 1 or 2 players and a choice of 6 naff games. Simple sprites and puke-worthy scrolling backgrounds are a joke. Well, the backgrounds were a bit much. A 5-note tune that goes on and on for the sound. Games included are hardly mind-taxing enough to keep you hooked. And games like this have been boring for a long time. So I think what we've got here is that in the mid to late 80s, the reviewers were all about the new exciting games, and there really wasn't much of a market for retro gaming at that point. And the comments say as much. What the hell is the point of this? Thought we'd seen the last of games like this years ago, and people like Silverbird come and revive them for more modern machines. Well, I was bored of them a long time ago, and they don't improve with age, it seems. I'm still bored with them now. This is a poor excuse for a video game, even on a budget. The sub-games included were dead and buried a long time ago, and the only reason they were popular in the first place was because they're the only games you could get. So yeah, obviously they weren't fans of the Pong style games in the late 80s. They hadn't really got the retro appeal of them at that point. And yet strangely, right next to this is a review of Gaplus, which is a release of a fairly retro style game, Gallagher style shoot 'em up game, and they gave that 71%, so there's a bit of an inconsistency there, I would say. But yeah, needless to say, ZZap were not impressed with that game whatsoever and gave it a very scathing review, and quite an unfair one to my mind. So we'll move on to the next review, and it wasn't actually a game this time, it was a utility, Ubik's Music. And as you can see, that's not listed on Lemon. Now I gave this a score of 6.3, and there is actually a ZZap review which we'll take a look at, but that doesn't have a rating on it, it's purely just a review. Lots of information there about it. Sometime Crash music reviewer John Bates is promoted to ZZap to cast a cold eye over the new budget music utility. So yeah, there's loads of info that I'm not going to go into that tells you how to use it, but at the bottom it does say, generally Ubik's Music is a very detailed program, but not one that I could recommend to a novice, as both its operation and rather complex instructions are somewhat overwhelming. That's exactly what I said about it, so we agree on that point. It does say for a games programmer or SID freak without a bespoke music program, it's a bargain, especially with the promise of a good selection of demo voices and tunes, which is pretty much what I said as well. So yeah, no need to go into the detail there, but they did review it, but there is no rating for it, so I can't really compare it to mine, and it wasn't in Lemon either, so I can't compare their score either. So let's move on to a game that is in the Lemon archive, River Raid, which was the 7th game I reviewed in the last batch of 10. And as you can see, they gave it a score of 7.8. I gave it a score of 6.8. So let's take a look at some of the review comments. Again, very big reviews comparing the Commodore 64 version to the Atari 2600. Let's read one of the short reviews here. Looks and sounds like a typical early C64 Atari 2600 game, but plays like a dream. So addictive and fun, keeps you coming back for more. River Raid was and still is one of my favourite C64 games. I've played it for many hours back in the late 80s. I own the cartridge today and hang on to it. The game sounds will never be forgotten. I can't actually remember them now, I'm thinking about it, but there you go. And a slightly different opinion here. I never understood why this game is so raved about. I've had it on both the 2600 and the Commie and was always bored after a couple of minutes of play. So let's move on to the ZZap review, and they gave it a slightly lower score than the Lemon users, but 70%. And as you can see, this is the review of the re-release rather than the original release from Activision in 1984. So scores wise, 70%, pretty low scores for graphics and sound, which kind of makes sense because they are quite simplistic. But hookability, lastability and value are all nicely rated. So let's just read a couple of the reviewer comments. This must be the oldest vertical scroller on the Commodore, but it still manages to knock the pants off new stuff like Xevious, Aftermath and Terra Cognita. The graphics give an initial air of simplicity, but the scrolling is dead smooth, the action is fast and furious. Definitely the best budget shoot 'em up around, they said. This aging and simplistic shoot 'em up may still offer a decent blast for fans of the genre, but I didn't find it particularly enthralling. The screens get progressively tougher, but do not alter graphically, which makes things a little repetitive. Although looking a little dated now, River Raid is certainly no disaster, but your budget collection won't suffer by its absence. So slight differences of opinion there too. But overall, a pretty good score from ZZap for the budget release of River Raid. Slightly higher from Lemon and slightly lower from me, but all pretty consistent around the 7 out of 10 sort of level. Moving on then to the next game, and that was Mad Nurse, which I gave a score of 6.1. Lemon Users gave a score of 6.4, so again pretty similar. And to look at the comments quickly, an amusing and original title that gets a tad too repetitive too quickly, agree with that. Sounds fun, but I got bored very quickly, agree with that too. Would never get away with this nowadays, that's what made it such harmless fun. I still remember the war as the babies kicked the bucket. Falling down shafts was really funny too. A friend of mine had this one, it was great, and of course frying babies was the first priority. There's some interesting user comments there on Lemon. So let's move on to the ZZap review. And they were not impressed. This is another one that they gave a pretty scathing review to. They gave it a score of 32%. Poor sprites and a simple backdrop, several jolly tunes play throughout, fun for a few games, but there's not enough variety to keep you playing. Well, I would agree with that. It does say not much game for £2, but I think a score of 32% is a bit on the harsh side. It was certainly playable and quite cleverly designed in some respects. It did just get quite repetitive. So a few of the reviewer comments here then. To be brutally honest, Mad Nurse had me bored stiff after a mere half an hour of play. I was hoping for a good laugh after all that I'd heard, but even seeing yabbering babies being electrocuted didn't evoke any laughter from me at all. The sound of the baby dying sounds more like a Dalek, and as for the ghastly theme tune, don't like it. So he didn't like it. And another comment here, dropping babies down lift shafts or onto plug sockets was fun for a while, but once the novelty wore off, I found Mad Nurse too monotonous to continue. So yeah, I mean, I'd probably agree with that to some extent, but I still think that the overall score of 32% is a bit on the harsh side. Just the last two games to go through now then, and second to last was Back to the Future, which I gave a score of 5.5, although you might say that was quite generous. Lemon Users gave it a score of 3.7. Crap game, but I shot it on eBay classifieds for small change. The box is nice. I suppose that's fair enough, I would say the same. What exactly am I supposed to do? A question many people have asked playing this game as well. Some good animation and digitized photos, but no gameplay and mediocre music. I agree with that entirely. Never understood what to do in this game. Plenty of people, much like myself, not really getting what the point of the game was. I love the Back to the Future series of movies, and I thought this game was one of the all-time worst games I've ever played. Very boring. So yeah, basically everyone pretty much agrees with my review that it was a terrible adaptation of a really good film. So let's take a look at the ZZap score, and theirs is much the same. They gave it 32%. The film is great, more than can be said for the game, they said. And just going through some of the more individual scores, graphics, substandard crippled sprites and dull backdrops. That's a little bit harsh, they weren't that bad. Poor interpretation of the film's tunes, I would probably agree with that as well. Any interest generated by the film is soon overcome by disappointment, and disappointment was a word I used to describe it also. Limited locations and little to do make this a right little boredom generator. Yeah, can't disagree with any of those comments. And just to look at some of the review comments quickly, Julian Rignall said, loved the film but wondered how they could make a game out of it. After all, it has nothing to do with computers or the like. Well, that's a strange comment. There's lots and lots of films that have nothing to do with computers, but they make perfectly good computer games out of them. So that's a bit of a bizarre comment. But anyway, he goes on to say, Electric Dreams have tried to capture the atmosphere of the film, but all they've really produced is a limited and very mediocre arcade adventure. Awful graphics, unimaginative backdrops and sprites which look as though they're about to fall flat on their faces. I thought the sprites were quite decent actually. No spot effects, not so much Back to the Future, more like Back to the Past, which makes not much sense either. So I'm going to skip that bigger review in the middle there, but this one starts with a bunch of coughs and chokes and splutters, and then said, sorry, but I have to get rid of the bad taste that Back to the Future has left in my mouth. It is awful. Dull, uninspiring and generally dissatisfying to play. To make matters worse, it is visually and orally offensive. Electric Dreams can certainly do better, as demonstrated by their amazing Amstrad release Spin Dizzy, so it's about time they made a start. So yeah, ZZap, not impressed with that one, and at least on this case I agree with them completely. So finally, let's round things off on a positive note and take a look at Paw Patrol, which was the last game I reviewed and gave it 8.5, my 50th game review. So Lemon Users not quite as generous, they gave it 7.6, but there's lots of comments here that are very positive. One of the best games on the system, awesome. Paw Patrol, the litter collecting simulator. It's true. Still my all-time best C64 game. I can't put my finger on why exactly. It's just so relaxing and cerebral. Fair enough. A nice little game. One of its best features was the way it allowed you to tweak the play mechanics, which meant that if you got bored of playing it one way, you could switch it up. I could never dance on those logs though. I didn't know you could dance on the logs. That's an interesting reveal. Title screen is remarkably good for 1984. Yeah, agree with that too. So yeah, loads of good comments there. Nothing really bad comments about those as far as I can tell. I'm not going to go through them all. So let's move over to the ZZap review. And they were incredibly glowing with it, although it's a bit of a strange layout because you've got most of the review on one page, but then the scores are actually just in this bar on the left hand side of this second page, which has got Harvey Headbanger on, which we saw earlier in this series. So anyway, they gave it 94%, which is a pretty stunning score, and a sizzler at that point. They weren't doing the silver medals for budget games at this point, I presume. So 97% for presentation, which I agree with. Graphics 94%, probably a little bit overrated there, and sound 96%. Again, I agree with what they're saying, 5 great tunes and quality sound effects, but to give it almost perfect rating seems a little bit much. Hookability and lastability and value all really high as well, especially the value, which is 99%, all the qualities of a full price game for only £2. So let's go back to the reviewer comments, and you can see this one here says the old cliche, they don't make them like they used to, certainly applies to Paw Patrol. It's nearly 3 years old but still compares very favourably with full price present day software, but Paw Patrol isn't full price, it's only $1.99 and as such ranks alongside Thrust, another Firebird game, as one of the best value for money budget releases. Why they didn't release this little gem over here themselves is a complete mystery, referring to Activision there. It's hardly as if their catalogue is overflowing with great games. By Paw Patrol, you've got no excuse not to. So glowing review there. And just to finish off the review down at the bottom here, 2 or 3 years ago, Activision were releasing some highly original and playable games such as Zenji, Toy Bazaar, Hero and Pathfinder. Since then they've been steadily going downhill and the quality of their software has deteriorated. There are a few exceptions, but it's a great pity that Activision never quite found the old magic. Paw Patrol is a classic piece of Activision software and they were foolish not to release it 2 years ago. Fortunately, Firebird have acquired the rights to this game and at a budget price. Graphics are lovely, as are the tunes and spot effects, and combined with simplistic but addictive gameplay, a true arcade feel is generated. Couldn't agree more really, so let's leave it at that. A glowing review for Paw Patrol, and that rounds off the last of the reviews in this batch of 10 that takes us up to 50 reviews in total. So just a couple of things left to do. Firstly, as is customary, I've ranked each set of review scores in order. Mine on the left hand side, ZZap in the middle and Lemon on the right, to do a straight comparison, and you can see some pretty good consistency for a change here. First I should mention that Ubik's music I've just put at the bottom because there's no review scores from ZZap or Lemon on that one, and also Pacman Pat didn't get a review on Lemon either, so there's a bit of inconsistency down the bottom there. But if we look at the top 3 first of all, you can see the same 3 games, all the Activision games, Paw Patrol, American Road Race and River Raid, are all in each medium's top 3. So myself and ZZap in fact are in exact correlation, with Paw Patrol, American Road Race and River Raid making the top 3. Slightly different order on the Lemon scores, but they've still got those in the top 3. Then things get mixed up a bit. I've got Video Classics up there in 4th place. Lemon's got it in 6th, and as we know, ZZap didn't like it at all and they've got it down the bottom, so that's a bit of an anomaly. Mad Nurse, again, myself and Lemon have got it fairly high up, but even in ZZap, even though it only got 32%, it's still sort of in the middle because of some of the other scores they gave some of these games. Back to the Future, pretty near the bottom for all 3, and Spikey Harold, again, lines up between myself and Lemon in 7th place, with Back to the Future in 8th place. Spikey Harold's a bit further up on the ZZap list, but only because again all the other ones have got such a low score, so ZZap were particularly stingy with this set of reviews. Down at the bottom I've got Pacman Pat, as did ZZap, pretty close to the bottom, and I'm pretty sure if it had got a Lemon score it would have been below the score that Back to the Future got. So all in all, pretty consistent. Just looking at the averages, my average is 6.24 across the 10 games. Lemon's is 6.28 across the 8 games that they reviewed, and the ZZap average is just 5.01, which is pretty damning for a lot of the games in this particular batch. I don't think they were quite as bad as that we're making out, but there were some stinkers in this batch of 10, it has to be said. And finally, just to round things off for this video, I thought since we've now reached the halfway point of the collection, it might be interesting to take a look at the games I've rated highest and lowest. So here's my best 10 rated games and also the worst 10 rated games. This does include re-releases, and of course the rating doesn't tell the whole story. There may well be some games that are better games but just didn't get such high ratings because of graphics and things like that. Certainly some of the puzzle games fall into that category. But here's the top 10 as it stands at the moment. Paw Patrol at the top, Warhawk, Arcade Classics, American Road Race, Harvey Headbanger, Slimey's Mine, Oh No, Scuba Kids, Thrust and Collapse. And the worst 10, with the worst at the top and the 10th worst at the bottom: Pacman Pat, Sea-Based Delta, Pneumatic Hammers, Hopper Copper, Beach Buggy Simulator, Jerry the Germ, Ollie and Lisa, European Five-A-Side, Street Warriors and Eyeball. And it's fair to say there's quite a lot of Silverbird packaging games in that worst 10 as it stands. So that rounds off another review comparison video. Let me know in the comments if you've got any thoughts about my scores, Zap scores or Lemon's scores. And I'll be back with another game review video very soon. But that's all for this one, so thanks for watching and bye for now.